Thank you so much for showing the film with us. And it was really, really beautiful to rewatch with the audience, visually and the sound. I was wondering, when you started working on this film and the concept of showing Napoli, from the past to today, and the mundane and the, Pompeii, from everything, how did you tackle, as maybe not a writing exactly, but like as a first concept before filming? And then if you filmed way more before editing, like what was really the structure when you went into the project?
Well, I most of the time, actually, in all my film, I never write a script. There is few pages about what somehow I want to look for, which is more theoretical, and then for me, it's all a process of encountering story, situation, people, building the trust between the people that I met, and and make that all this become part of a film eventually. And all the people that you see here, these are all the people I met throughout these 3 years I was there. We were working only two people. I was with my assistant, Alberto, and me. I did the camera and sound, so we were only two people. And so it's somehow easy to take the time to wait for the right light, for the right situation, for the story to become part of you, and to find out what do you want to film. And so at the beginning, my idea of the film was always somehow, I felt that Naples was like an enormous off-screen, like fuori campo, no? How you say in French? In French is beautiful. Fuori campo, eh? Ocean. So an off-screen, because whatever you see there, it's hiding something else constantly. So this was an idea that I always had in the film, and then this very thin separation of the memory between the present, the past, and a future that could be. So these were the three elements I was always looking for in my stories and in my frame. And deciding to do the film in black and white, it was almost like expecting that the present become immediately, once you film, a part of an archival, so part of the past. So these they were the element that I always hold with me in order to start filming. And in this film, I start editing quite in a parallel way. We did almost 3 years of editing while shooting and editing with my editor Fabrizio, and then at the end, Giobini, he came because we were so overwhelmed with the process of the editing, that so we needed to have someone that had like a separate point of view. So towards the end, Giobini, he came, and it was a very good way of keeping a distance from the material and having someone understanding the process, of when you live so deeply every day on a storytelling. So you did somehow to, and we never did that because, as I say, it was like always parallel, the shooting and the editing of the film. I mean, not that I was editing every day, but every 2-3 months, every time I had a story, every time there was something, I felt the need of editing, almost to create, because every story here can be a film on its own. So from Titi to the Purgatorio, each one can be a 1 hour and a half film on its own. So the big challenge of this film was that to work a lot on subtraction and on transformation of things, which I think that what cinema is to transform reality constantly in something else. And I personally don't care much. Of course, this is a documentary, but because I deal with reality, I deal with real people, and there is no writing a scenario. But for me, the language I want to use always in my work is the language of cinema, and that's what is important for me, to somehow constantly transform reality in something else, and a big work of subtraction. So how much can you take out? and how much that story can hold. And in the editing, it's very difficult when you have so many stories almost on this kaleidoscopic structure, to cut in a way that you don't get too involved on the story and be finding the right moment to go somewhere to another story, to another story. So for me, it's always a matter of finding the space between the character and the story and the and the structure that you are giving to the film. And it's almost like in music, when you find the space between the notes, you know, that silence is more important than the two notes themselves. You know, otherwise you cannot create the communication between these notes. So the same here, from one character to another character, to a story to another story, has to be something that somehow unified them. And this has been the hard. That's why I felt in this film the need of keep editing and find always the synthesis on every story and try to subtract from every story to arrive to the essence of each of them.
So you said you stayed there for 2 years?
3 years.
3 years, okay.
I say 3 years, but probably 4, because in between I did the Pope film in Viaggio, so I stopped for 8 months, which was a good way to to do the film on the Pope Francis, and it was good for me to take a step back and then go back to the film again. So it was a very useful moment to detach myself and to go somewhere else, and then re-immerse myself in this project. And I have to thank my producer that allowed me to do that, spending time. And because the biggest investment in my work is time, you know, it's like I need to completely immerse myself. I'm a director that doesn't go home at night. I always live in the location. I stayed 3 years in Naples, 4 years in Naples, and then every day becomes a journey in order to encounter that story, that moment, that thing, something that you say, okay, this is a story I want to follow.
Because you have a way of showing, of, I guess, understanding and showing Napoli that is both an internal vision, like you're from there, and also an external vision, and it really reflects on the film. I was wonder that's why also I was curious to know how long you stayed there and how long it took you to know the people, you know, like, yes, Titi, but also people who came from the boat and everyone that
Yeah, that was the
can
most
see.
challenging story because the
I'm
boat
sure.
was coming only for 4 days, 5 days, and I visited so many boats. They were like in the port coming off in this boat. But then one day I met Abud, and he's only 21 years old, Abud, and he was the one when I got the permit to be in the boat. He was the one that somehow was following us, and he opened himself up so such an intimate way. And I remember I immediately start filming him the same night. I start spending time with him. So in his time off, I was just in his room and spending time with him and following him around. But I had only 5 days to film. But it was incredible how close became the relationship immediately, because there was a strong need of him to open up, to make people part of the pain that they're going through. You know, also the radio, when he listened to the radio that six sailors died in the port of Odessa. That's the reality that keep going on, you know, and to bring us food, basically. So what is amazing, the film that I was by chance discovered, because also the Japanese, when I started filming the Japanese, I was in Japan showing the film of the Pope, and I did a master class at Tokyo University, and someone told me, what's your project? I'm working in Naples, where in the area of Vesuvio, Pompei. I said, oh, we have a team. It's been 22 years there, and they're excavating. And a team, a Japanese team, and I went to meet them, and I start filming them. But I didn't understand the language. So when the teacher talks about the Roman going there, so immediately you create this connection, the grain, the Roman time, the boat arriving from Syria. So all this is almost chance and necessity. No, everything happened by chance, and then in a structure become a necessity on the storytelling. But again, not all these characters were thought before I started filming, so everything happened on this long journey. That's why for me time is important, to spend time there and to immerse myself constantly on a daily life. Even when I don't film, I have to be there. I have to look for things. I have to do, even if I stay in my hotel for 1 week, thinking what I'm gonna go do next, and be depressed because you don't know how to go on. It's important that you're always there. Also, the moment of doubts. Mm.
Do you film on with the same equipment and camera all the time,
No,
or
actually,
you switch
I,
pending?
I'm not very technical. In fact, my biggest now for me, camera. I always change the camera. I don't like to be attached to a technical thing. So this film, I use a different camera, and and I say I'm not gonna say which camera I use, because when I asked for support, they didn't give me anything. No lens, no nothing. So I said, okay, I'm gonna finish the film and don't tell that I shoot with your camera, because they didn't give us nothing. Completely zero. So I said, I'm not gonna say with which camera I shot, but every project I change the camera. I
I
like
mean,
to,
you have
because every
such.
project have different needs, and this film I shot mostly with a 50 millimeter lens, which I love it. Also the close up, I love to do the close up with a 50 millimeter lens. All the procurator, when they were in the helicopter, was like very close to him, but with this wide lens. So mostly I use a 50 millimeter lens, and which is what you see with your eye, and I love that lens. And then 35 millimeters. So I had basically only 2, 3 lenses that I shot with, and then 21. I had 3 lenses.
You can shoot anything with this because you do a lot of different sort of takes.
What do you mean with these 3 lenses?
Yeah.
Yeah, I use only 3 lenses. And I love to shoot with prime lens. I don't like to use the zoom. I like to for me it's very important the distance that you create from the subject to the camera. And when people say, well, what's the difference between documentary and fiction, I always say I don't care about that. What I care is about the difference between true and false. And for me, the truth, especially in documentary but in everything, it's about finding the right distance of the camera from the subject. And this is a challenge constantly every day, and to find that this. And I like to work on a prime lens because it allowed me not to have doubts, and to put every time the camera in a tripod and have things happening, have a story happening within that frame that I choose. Until there is no a structure on that frame, I don't like to change the position of the camera. And so most of the shot here, I'd say 90% is done on a tripod, except in the helicopter. And then there's a long tracking shot, which is the train. That's my movement in the film that take us from story to history to time. And so the train becomes like a metaphor for a time machine, so that we go from the present to the past, from one story to another story. That for me it was another idea that I had at the beginning, to use the train as a way of telling the story of the very encounter that I had in the film.
Was it challenging to shoot in Napoli in terms of like tremors and earthquake or possible?
That start arriving later in the
Okay.
film. I start filming in every film I did, at least the one I did in Italy. They were in Focammare, in Sacrogra. In this film here, I did 3 films in Italy. I always included somehow the institution. In Sacrogra, I had the ambulance. In the Focammare, I have the navy. And here I wanted to work with the fire department and say, let's see this story where it take us. And when I was looking for the way I was approaching this story, the first encounter I had was in this phone where they received the whole phone from Naples, basically. So this is like a radio, the people for, how you call that station? Call center, like the call center of the fire department. And immediately when I was there, I find the way they were so generous and open and patient. It became like almost people call for any reason there. We have all kind of story. That's why I said that could be a movie there made, and I probably have footage to make a film there inside. And people come from the most desperate reasons. Sometimes even the dramatic things that has to be handled from the police, they call the fire department. So they're like kind of. I think if we had an army like the fire department, it would be fantastic. The only army allowed should be the fire department. That would be the most beautiful. The world will be probably different. And the way they handled this phone call, I was so surprised that then I decided to just stay there. And that for 3 years. I went when I didn't know where to go. I just went there, put the camera down, and waited for the phone call to arrive. Sometimes was difficult to go, but then I find these three people that I was following them. So I used to go there when I knew that they were on duty. And then slowly it started this earthquake, and then I was able also to film that. And it's incredible how that story of fear that is in the film become also that a universal story, because unfortunately we do live in a world where fear is a part of our daily condition. We live in this suspended future, and there is a transversal, a universal feeling that all over. And I felt that this sense of fear that comes in the film, it's something that reach all over. This sense of being uncomfortable, being in a sense of not in our own best moment, in history. And probably the film is also about the fragility of our civilization, our culture, our heritage, of the past, of the present. We think that we go forever, but then, as we see at the end of the film, the trace of the past are somehow either from the nature on the volcano in Pompeii or the water. We're always so fragile, no? So the film also is about that, the fragility of our time, and of our civilization, probably, if we want to call that. But Margaret Mead, I know now it's not Margaret Mead, but I grew up when there was a Margaret Mead Film Festival. Now Margaret Mead has been cancelled because no, doesn't exist anymore, the Margaret Mead Festival, because it was like cultural appropriation. So Margaret Mead doesn't exist anymore as a reference, but she used to say, I remember, that civilizations start when someone makes something for the others. And when I was editing the film, I started thinking, what do they have in common, all these people that I've been following for 3 years? In a way, what they have in common is like they all give something to others. Titi, the procurator, there's a way of giving to the others. So this is something which I think the film is very positive, in that sense, has a very strong hope.
I mean, you did this in your previous work also, finding someone who gives, and it was quite strong in Fire at Sea.
Yeah.
And it's like when you bring nearly a political element to what you're filming. It's not obvious, but it's there, in the
Yeah, I
undertext.
think the duty for us, for filmmaker, for anyone that creates something with their work, is we have to find always an ethical approach, what we do. And I strongly believe that in filmmaking, the first political and ethical things that we have to achieve is the frame. Framing is a political and ethical act, the distance, what you're framing, the story you're telling. So in a way, all my films are political, because that choice of putting a frame is never accidental, but it's always try to tell a story that is universal, possibly, and that open. I don't like to make film to divide the world in good and bad, but there's always a certain kind of element that suggests the audience that something is wrong. For example, these people that they risk their life daily to bring us food, and for us it's so normal to say we find the grain in the supermarket to make the recipe, like the kids is listening to the recipe. So you find 200 grams in any supermarket, and we never think what is in the back of that to bring us food, to bring us bread and to bring us what we need to survive on it. So we give everything for granted and we never know what is in the back. And I think all the element, all the story in a tiny way, they do have that element of a political point of view, which is important.
I'm going to ask another question about that. Have you shared the film with people you were filming? Have they seen
In
the
Naples,
film?
we had a fantastic premiere in Naples with everybody, and everybody was on the stage, and they talked to the audience. It was like 500 people audience, and it was a beautiful, beautiful premiere they did. Everybody was there, the kids, the fire department.
The sailors as well?
Excuse me?
The
No, unfortunately, no, he couldn't because he was in Istanbul, and would have been so hard. He was the only one that was there, but I was keeping him posted about and sending picture about what was happening. No, he couldn't. He couldn't make because he was in the boat in Istanbul going to Ukraine. Mm.
You stay in touch with
Oh
everybody?
yeah, yeah. I'm in touch with everybody. Titi sends me good night and good morning every day since I met him. It's like I found a good morning, good night. That strange things that come with strange pictures inside. I don't know. I said, where do I find these things? You know, like good night and it's stars and colors and hearts. Once in a while, I do answer him when I'm in New York. I say, good night from New York, Titi. Otherwise, every
We
day
love
is like,
Titi.
no. Well, Titi is like has a 3,000 year. Titi, you know, is what we think about. It's been there for 3,000. That's there is always a strong element linked to the past, like Maria, when the way she goes and search for fragments of history. But the Japanese are like the detective of time, you know, somehow, you know, to find from the semen the weight of the past, the persecutor that is he's one of the challenging jobs he has. He goes away around with three cars escorting him because he's like, deal a lot with the Camorra mafia and things. And there are elements in the film that the background is not so you perceive, like even in the church, you know, the people crawling down this pagan ritual that is there. In the back, there is a lot of control from the criminality on that world there. So there's always suggestion of a world that is shaking, but I never like to underline that in my work. I like to suggest a little bit and then let people wonder and think about their own conclusion.
I mean, you also show cinema. You know, there's people there's a screening room and films in the back. And it seems like it was very pleasurable for you to add this.
Yeah, the good thing is that nobody say, "Oh, you filmed that because cinema is dead." No, nobody say that, but there's a thought that is there, you know, in the back that maybe cinema in a big screen is not doesn't have a long future, unfortunately. But that's the result of it is falling down theaters because people don't go anymore to the cinema. In Italy, it's a huge crisis of the cinema. Here, in city like New York, Paris, London still survive that. But in small city, it's very shaky the future of showing film in a theater. Unfortunately, people they make choices of watching things at home, and it's very hard to bring people to go to the scene. That's why it's so beautiful when you have a theater full of people sharing this moment in a big screen. I was telling before, it's such an important thing, and hopefully it can resist that. So it's an act of resistance to go to cinema. I think for our culture and for our to have the cinema survive, especially. And there, when I saw this cinema, it's like 100 meters from Titi shop. And I was always wondering this cinema completely burned and completely this huge cinema was like maybe 1,000 people sitting there. You know, it was like huge cinema. And there are like three different theater in that cinema. And finally, I got the permit to get inside there. And when I saw this screen, I always wanted to use the archival footage from the beginning of the film, but I didn't know how. You did you did with Pietro Marcello. Pietro is the master of using archival footage.
Absolutely.
Pietro, and so I had to find a way to show the archival in a different way. So when I saw the cinema, I said, okay, I'm gonna screen here all the archival footage in this unexistent screen, and giving the feeling that somehow memory and history can still breathe from a screen from the past. So I didn't want to use the archival as a counterpoint on the structure of the film. So also that became like a small story of this cinema that somehow are completely archaeological element, but still they breathe on the memory of the screen. So that was the idea of how to use the archival footage.
Unfortunately, they are giving me a signal because we need to wrap up.
Okay.
But you're coming back tomorrow for another screening, and we will make more time for you to speak and have questions.
Thank you so much.